Imagine a quiet diner on the edge of a small town, where a 98-year-old veteran sits enjoying his meal alone, a life full of stories etched in his weathered face. Suddenly, the atmosphere changes as 7 rowdy bikers storm in, their loud voices and intimidating presence filling the room. What starts as harmless banter quickly turns disrespectful, their mocking laughter directed at the old man. But instead of reacting with anger or fear, the veteran calmly pulls out his phone and makes a single call. Within minutes, the biker's smug expressions shift to sheer panic. What could a simple call from this elderly man possibly mean? Who did he contact, and why are these tough bikers suddenly looking so uneasy? Stick around because this is a story you won't forget, a tale of respect, courage, and an unexpected twist that will leave you cheering. The room fell silent as the bikers exchanged nervous glances, their laughter fading into awkward murmurs. The old man stayed calm, his hand steady as he held the phone to his ear. He spoke quietly, his voice firm but composed, as though he'd done this 1,000 times before. The bikers tried to play it cool, but something about the veteran's demeanor unsettled them. Was it his unshaken confidence, or the way he seemed completely unfazed by their intimidation? The diner staff and a few customers watched with bated breath, sensing that this man wasn't just any elderly patron. Who was he calling? What could possibly make a group of towering bikers so uneasy? One of the bikers shifted uncomfortably, his bravado slipping. "You think we're scared of you," he muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. Whatever was coming, they all felt it, and it was enough to shake even the toughest of them. The old man set the phone down gently, his expression unchanged. He picked up his coffee, taking a slow sip, as if nothing unusual was happening. The bikers were visibly restless now, their earlier confidence cracking under the weight of the unknown. The leader of the group, a burly man with tattoos creeping up his neck, tried to reclaim control. "What's the big deal, old man? Who do you think you're scaring with that phone call?" He sneered, but his voice wavered ever so slightly. The veteran didn't respond, just looked at him with eyes that carried decades of experience, eyes that had seen more than any of them could imagine. A waitress who had been quietly watching from behind the counter leaned toward another customer and whispered, "You know who he is, don't you? That's Colonel Mason." The name struck a chord with a few people in the diner. Whispers began to ripple through the room. Colonel Mason, a decorated war hero. The bikers didn't seem to notice the growing murmurs, but their unease deepened as the sound of distant engines began to rumble outside. The low rumble outside grew louder, vibrating through the walls of the diner. Everyone turned their heads toward the windows, their curiosity mixing with a strange sense of anticipation. The bikers glanced at each other, their cocky facades slipping further. One of them muttered under his breath, "What's going on out there?" But no one answered. Colonel Mason remained calm, his gaze steady as he watched the men squirm. "You boys seem nervous," he said softly, his voice carrying a quiet authority that demanded attention. The leader of the bikers clenched his fists, his bravado faltering. "We're not scared of anything," he snapped, but his eyes darted toward the door as the sound of approaching motorcycles became deafening. The first set of headlights appeared, then another and another. Within moments, the parking lot was filled with a line of gleaming bikes, each one more imposing than the next. Men and women in military-style jackets dismounted, their movements purposeful and synchronized. They weren't just any riders. They were Mason's old unit. Inside the diner, the tension was electric. The bikers were frozen in place, their earlier arrogance replaced with visible fear. Colonel Mason finally stood up, his presence commanding the room. "You wanted to make a scene," he said, his voice steady but firm. "Well, let's see how you handle it now." The door to the diner swung open, and the lead rider stepped in. A tall, broad-shouldered man with a sharp gaze that seemed to pierce through everyone in the room. His jacket bore the insignia of an elite military unit, and the way he carried himself made it clear he was someone not to be messed with. He scanned the room, his eyes landing on Colonel Mason before offering a respectful nod. "Colonel," he said simply, his voice calm but authoritative. The bikers, now visibly shaken, tried to backtrack. "We didn't mean any harm," one of them stammered, his earlier bravado gone. The leader of the bikers took a step forward, attempting to salvage his pride. "This is a misunderstanding. We didn't know who he was." The rider smirked, but there was no humor in it. "You didn't need to know who he was to show respect," he replied coldly. Behind him, the rest of the riders were gathering near the entrance, their presence filling the air with silent intensity. But just as the tension reached its peak, something unexpected happened. A young woman in the diner, who had been silent until now, stood up and addressed Colonel Mason directly. "Colonel, they didn't just insult you," she said, her voice trembling with both fear and determination. "They've been harassing people in this town for weeks." The room fell silent again as the weight of her words settled. Mason's calm demeanor shifted, his jaw tightening. "Is that so?" he said, his tone sharper now. The bikers were caught off guard, realizing this situation was far bigger than they had anticipated. What had started as a display of arrogance was quickly unraveling into something they couldn't control. Colonel Mason turned to the leader of the bikers, his eyes now blazing with a quiet fury. "Harassing people who can't fight back? That's the lowest kind of cowardice," he said, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. The lead rider stepped closer, his presence towering over the bikers. "You've made a habit of picking on the wrong people," he said, his tone calm but laced with menace. "But today, you picked the wrongest asterisk." The bikers flinched as the riders outside began filing into the diner, their boots heavy against the floor. One by one, they formed a wall behind Mason, their disciplined stance making it clear they were ready for action if it came to that. The bikers tried to hold their ground, but the weight of the moment crushed whatever courage they had left. "We're leaving," the biker leader finally muttered, motioning for his crew to follow. But Mason raised a hand, stopping them in their tracks. "Not so fast," he said. "Before you go, you're going to apologize, to me, to the people in this diner, and to anyone else you've wronged." The bikers hesitated, but a quick glance at the riders surrounding them made it clear they had no choice. One by one, they muttered their apologies, their voices barely above a whisper. As they shuffled toward the exit, the lead rider called out, "And if we ever hear about you causing trouble again, you'll be dealing with all of us." The bikers nodded quickly, disappearing into the night without looking back. The diner erupted into quiet cheers and applause. Mason, however, remained calm, nodding to his old unit with gratitude. Just as the tension seemed to ease, the young woman from earlier approached Mason, holding out a folded piece of paper. "They didn't just harass people," she said, her voice steady now. "They've been running a racket here. I have names and details." Mason unfolded the paper, his expression hardening as he read. He turned to his unit. "Looks like our work here isn't done after all." Colonel Mason studied the list in silence for a moment before folding it neatly and tucking it into his pocket. He gave the young woman a reassuring nod. "Thank you for your courage," he said. "We'll make sure this ends here." His words brought a visible sense of relief to the diner's patrons, who had been quietly watching the entire scene unfold. The riders filed out with Mason, their presence still commanding but now filled with purpose. As they revved their engines and rode off into the night, the parking lot seemed to echo with a renewed sense of justice. Inside the diner, People began to talk again, their voices lighter, their smiles brighter. The young woman turned to the waitress and said, "I never thought anyone would stand up to them." The waitress smiled. "Not just anyone. That man's a hero." Outside, Mason's bike disappeared into the darkness, leaving behind a town that could finally breathe easy again.